Evening and welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Chaliathamri. I'm pleased to welcome this evening Dr. Harinda Vidanage, Director of the Center for Strategic Assessment at the Kotalavala Defence University, and he is here to talk about our national interests and how to decide on our national interests. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Harinda.
Good evening, Nilesh.
Right. So, Dr. Harinda, during these past few months, especially with Donald Trump's new strategies, and he comes up with a new strategy every week, it seems. With all this, international relations and diplomacy came to the fore. And what became obvious is that certain countries are very strong in knowing and defining their national interests, whereas other countries are not so, and will perhaps go with the flow and decide on the go, basically, which is not the best way to do things. So now let's take an example. We see right now India is having issues with the Trump presidency's tariffs. There are some fundamental political issues, but India, the Indian government, is sticking to its guns and saying, no, this has always been our national interest. Now, of course, they will negotiate. There's a little leeway here and there, but they are very clear about what India's national interests are. Now, what about countries like Sri Lanka? Do we know, have we defined our national interest? This is something fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah, I think sadly what has happened is, well, it's not that we have, I think there is a consciousness of what national interests are, but the difference between a government or political leadership articulating that and driving policy vis-a-vis it being articulated out clearly for anyone to know and to base policies based on your national interests as well as the allied ideas. It really helps any administration to connect their policies with the ground. The problem with countries like our country is the fact is that I don't know whether people even know what do you mean by a national interest. The English term is a little bit better, but if you go to the Sinhala term, it's more opaque. It's called Jati Kabilasha. I don't know if you go to 10th grade and ask students what ape aparate Jati Kabilasha and Kumanda, what are our national interests, I'm not too sure if people understand the question even. So that is the tragedy. I think the problem is when countries develop their statecraft as well as mechanisms of governance, most advanced societies bring out white papers on the overarching view of what we call national security and international security. The moment in Sri Lanka, if I say security, people reduce it to defense, military, nothing to do like that. It's not that. This is a larger component of how the country envisage its status, how it is going to go forward, what is its security environment. So vis-a-vis, how is it going to articulate its future ambitions. So to do that, you have to have a starting point. That's where if any country has a national security strategy, national security policy, where the primary thing they articulate is the national interest. Based on the national interest, you draw your economic plan. Based on the national interest, you draw your foreign policy. Based on that, you draw your national defense plan or strategy. And based on that, you start, bringing that into an operational level of policy making as well as then at a level of functional levels of ministries, departments, taking that. So that is why sometimes, if in advanced societies, irrespective of political change, some of the good things continue, some of the maybe the bad political decisions disappear because you have a primary starting point as well as a vision. And it also keeps renewing every 4 to 5 years, either being reviewed or renewed. So you have countries doing their, if we just saw Britain, the United Kingdom come out with their refresh, Australia come out with a review, Japan come out a couple of years back and looking at, so every country has, some countries, these documents, these ideas are fundamentally public, a certain percentage. Some of these ideas, for example, India still doesn't have a publicly articulated national security policy, but it is articulated to the system. So if you're a public servant, you know exactly where you want to go. So I think that is one of the major, the importance of such mechanisms is in the times of such as this kind of more turbulent times, when things are changing fast, rapidly, it helps governments, leaders to navigate the shocks a little bit more efficiently, as well as it gives you what strategic decisions you have to make rather than ad hoc knee-jerk reactions. And it also gives people like you to ask the right questions, because the problem now is we don't ask the right questions, neither do we have the right answers at both ends, because we are minus the understanding of these fundamentals. That's why it is valuable.
Now, Dr. Harinda, it strikes me that in Sri Lanka, our politicians tend to decide on policies. Yes, every ministry comes out with a proper policy once in a way. It's been done before for decades, and then all that just gathers dust on a shelf, and the politicians generally have decided what to do. We see perhaps a shift in that with this government, but time will tell. They are formulating policies, but then it's all about sticking to the policies as well. But how does one formulate these policies? Who is it who gets involved? Because you can't just have a bunch of political leaders. They are perhaps not the best suited. They should be part of the whole system, but who else? I mean, is it academics, diplomats? How does that?
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the fact that this government has the best mandate so far in the recent past, both at the executive level of the presidency as well as the legislative level of the parliament, where both and of the fact that they have clearly articulated that they wanted to bring out a new direction. The challenge is when you are thinking of articulating future policies as well as articulating a clear strategy, there you have to have what we call a process. I mean, it's a process. It's not like it can't be ad hoc. You need to of course appoint a committee, but the committee is not the one that's going to draft, or the committee is just the convener. The committee's main task is to identify the stakeholders, right? Bring all of them together, as well as have some fundamental political leadership key points. I mean, any policy or any guiding principle will be political, because that is the aspiration of the political leadership of that time. So every country has there, for example, you have the Trump, if you look at the Trump's White House website vis-a-vis Joe Biden, vis-a-vis Trump, it's significantly different. But it denotes a certain direction the leader wants to take. So that probably the policies then has to align with that. Political ambitions always come, but it has to be at a scale where there is a multi-stakeholder engagement. So it's not just academics. It's not just, it has to, so I think because it's such a complex process, that is why countries start with, mostly these days, either with what we call the National Security Policy, NSP initiatives, or National Security Strategy Initiative. It's called the NSS. So that's why I said, the moment we say security, some people might think the securitization. No, it provides, because security is a fundamental bedrock of a state's existence. So that is why you take the national security strategy first. You bring in multiple stakeholders. They can be academics, they can be defense people, they can be corporate sector. And then they carve out some of the basic ideas that they bring, and of course the legal fraternity, because the constitution, minus an articulated national interest document, the constitution becomes the primary document source where you take your national interest. So, for example, the sovereignty of the country, indivisibility of the country, things like that. These are national interests. But how do you achieve that? Achieving national interest is very much linked to national security. That is why you start with the national security strategy. Every country does it. Most countries does it. So once you identify that, like the reason why you do it is only in an NSS you do the strategic analysis of the environment, then what we call the security environment. Again, it's not about defense alone, but it's about, for example, what is the environment, how conducive is it for business, what are the major trends, what are the major challenges, for example, in the Indian Ocean region, what are the potentials we have, where should our foreign policy be, be kind of, engineered architecture. Otherwise, we are having always three debates in Sri Lanka, whether it's non-alignment, neutrality, or whether we should take a side. That is the question you all ask people, that is, and then people and experts all have to justify it. It happens in a vacuum. How does this fit in? Happens in the larger architecture you make when you do the assessment. Only based on that can you really say, so it is driven partly by data, looking at the trends, looking at the figures, as well as the qualitative approach to how countries have shifted. So, for example, we keep saying China, we keep saying India, but we have to take into stock, for example, if we are referring to a China 14 years back, the China that aligned with our kind of ambitions when we were in the final stage of the war, the China that supported the effort, but that China is no longer that China now, right? It is pre-Xi Jinping China. We really don't know if this China will looks at Sri Lanka the same way. I mean, this is the example. So to understand those nuances, you need to do the assessments. Then only you can come up with kind of, say, tell the corporate sector, these are the areas that you might want to, but you can do further research, you can do further analysis, then you come up with something. But at least the framing of that approach has to be there. That is the initiative of the government, and hopefully it should not be a single-sided one. In the US, we call it the bipartisan. It has to be a multi-party. It has to be a multi-party kind of a representation, or multiple. Because the problem in Sri Lanka, why we don't have any of these, is we have never had at least a bi-party consensus in the parliament on at least the fundamentals of our national security, fundamentals of our foreign policy. That is why we don't have articulated foreign policy saying these are our foreign policy fundamentals, because we never had an agreement. So that is the starting point.
Now, you spoke of bipartisan and multi-partisan. So that brings to mind Japan.
Yeah.
Now, Japan does change prime ministers fairly regularly, and the parties also change around a bit. But to the outside world, there's not much change in how Japan deals with the rest of the world. Their policies, especially their foreign policy, is very stable, which points to the fact that the Japanese, they have identified what their national interests are.
Yes.
And they stick with it. So you don't suddenly find another prime minister coming and upsetting the apple cart.
No. So Japan is a very good example, because, for example, Japan had a significant number of political transitions since Abe, and Japan's foreign policy, security, defense, economic policy are all guided by what they call the NSS 2022. That is the National Security Strategy of 2022. And last year, they started working on their National Defense Strategy, which is 2024. So up to now, see, whatever the changes, it has not changed. So I just thought, for the interest of the viewers, just to, this National Security Strategies, I always tell people, public, these are, when you ask the Japanese or anybody, why do you have a written down national security strategy? It is not for academics, so it's for everybody in the public, for people to understand what our country's aspirations are, where we want to go, how have we articulated. For example, if I read the Japan's national, so in this national security strategy of Japan, there are 3 articulated national security interests. They say Japan's national security interest, very simple. Number 1, Japan will maintain its sovereignty and independence, defend its territorial integrity, and secure the safety or life of person and properties of its national. and so that it goes on. Number 2, Japan will achieve the prosperity of Japan and its nationals through economic growth, thereby consolidating its own peace and security. Number 3, Japan will maintain and protect universal values such as freedom, democracy, respect for fundamental human rights, so forth. So 3 articulated national interests. So based on that, they have developed their kind of broader approach. They have developed what are the security strengths Japan has, what are the how Japan has a very complex security environment. Though we might think our security environment is complex, it's far more complicated than us for Japan in that particular part of the world. But they are trying their very level best to face it, and also keep their citizens as well, everybody informed of the path the government is going to take. Of course, the policies, the political decisions may differ between parties and all, but they are still sticking to the larger plan, the larger understanding, large architecture. So it's not you can't just come and say, okay, I don't think this is a problem, we will no, like that. It goes against or it mitigates any kind of opinionated worldviews that leaders may have, which may not be aligned to the well-resourced, well-researched, well-structured assessments they have made. That is the difference.
Now, Dr. Harinda, we took Japan as one example, but then if you take the United States, the US under Joe Biden had completely different policies to the US under Donald Trump. So now you mentioned earlier that countries change their policies. China 20 years ago is different to China today. But the same goes for countries like the US, which every 4 years or 8 years they change their president. So in that respect, you really have to deal with the changes and the future changes, don't you? I mean, right now the whole world is focusing on the Trump presidency, but this is his second term. So 3.5 years from now, it will be another president, and nobody really knows who that will be. So we have to keep an eye out for all these things, don't we?
Yeah, I think so, because the US is a good example of what we call a turbulent world. So I think most of for the last half century or so, everybody had the luxury of a world which of course had conflicts, had its pandemics, had its economic crises, but it didn't have a world where the fundamentals of how the world worked was challenged by the country that actually led the transition of this world after the Second World War, right? So that is why Trump is important. Trump is not just him, as I say, he's a product, he's a reflection of a changing United States. The United States, which believed it has established order, it has brought stability, peace, prosperity to the world, to itself, and creating a regime of trading norms, trading principles, global principles on human rights, all these things, and suddenly finding itself feeling the very institutions and the mechanisms they set up are working against them. Hence, it is their preponderant right to gain their lost glory in a certain way by challenging that system. So when Trump started imposing that tariff, kind of that roulette of tariffs, it actually goes against the very principles they have established. Everybody knows that. But the point is not then why. So Trump is clearly signaling something. So to get America's glory, or what they call the "Make America Great Again," the tariffs. I mean, of course, there are repercussions of tariff for everyone. But being a strategist, I have to see through certain things. Our job is to see more through what we are having, the conversation we are having now. So it is a clear strategic position where Trump is making countries come and negotiate. So the process of negotiation is unacceptable in the system they established. You didn't have to negotiate because you place rules, orders where trade could take place. Now suddenly with one player, others are forced to negotiate. And in Sri Lanka, I think we are not getting this idea of negotiation right, because I think we keep saying Sakacha. If I hear most people saying, Api, Amerikawa ekka Sakacha.
It's a discussion.
It's a discussion. Negotiation is not a discussion. Negotiation, it always has, it has, you have to give and take. It's a give and take thing. But negotiations are also contingent on who has the what we call the disposition of power. If I have more to take than and less to offer, and if you have more to lose and less to offer, that whole dimension is different. So that is why. So I think it's a reiteration by Trump that the US, if you are to do business with you need to do business with the US. That is still clear. Most of the the global companies, the global trading, if you look at the numbers, it's quite big. Countries really depend on the US market and US access. So you are now forced to come and negotiate. And they give you a little, and then you have to accept terms and conditions. Unacceptable in the system they have created, but that is the reality that we are going to face in the future. So post-Trump, things may change, but the fact that what Trump has tried to do is to kind of bring US back into a position of strength by undermining the very institutions they created, because he feels this is the way the US can regain its position of strength in the world. So by disrupting the order they created, but it's for a country like Sri Lanka, okay, that's the reality we are going to face with. And this is the problem with such a system is when you have an order, things are not going to change very, in incrementally. But this, as you said, well, Trump thought 20% for Sri Lanka today, but in few days, if for a couple of months, if he down the line, if he feels Sri Lanka has not adhered to certain things he thinks are in the national interest of the US, things might be different.
Interesting thoughts indeed. We need to take a short commercial break. I am in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
Compared to last 10 years.
That's not true.
It is. If you
That's absolutely not true.
Ask for statistics. If you want, I'll bring that within.
Please bring it.
Look at the passport. Look at the driving license. How long it takes?
So
Not even a car today. If you look at the car, in which country a vehicle doesn't have number plate.
We need to have a proper budget planning where you actually get the approvals to all the projects before the budget is read in the parliament. And then once it is read, you can start on implementing it, right? Once you get the approval, you can implement it.
So as you know, 3.9, if you have inflation of 5%, that means you're basically having a growth of about 1%. Right. So you're looking at a period 2-3 years without much growth.
Face the Nation every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
කන්සර්ට් කරපු දේ තමයි වෙන්නේ. ඒක අනිවාර්යෙන් වෙනවා සිස්.
මං කියන්නේ අර කරන් මෙතනින් බැන්නට පස්සේ සෑහෙන කාලයකට එළියට එන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ. බෝඩිම හරියන්නේත් නැහැ.
තාත්තගේ ජීවිතේ නැති උනේ මේක විසඳන්න ගිහින්. තාත්තා වැටුණු තැනින් මම නැගිටිනවා.
මට නම් හිතෙන්නේම මේකට මොකක් හරි සිකියුරිටි සිස්ටම් එකක් ඇති කියලා බ්‍රෝ.
උනාට ඉතින් මං ගත්ත කියලා තේමිය දැනගත්තේ නෑනේ.
ඌ දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා ඔබ කොහොමද දන්නේ? කවුද දන්නේ? ඌ දැනගෙන දන්නේ නැහැ වගේ ඉන්නවද?
අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
අපි ඇත්තරම නපුරු පිටසක් කොලෙක් මේ ලෝකෙට ගෙන්නමු.
හවස පාමාට්ටම ගෙන්නමුද?
දැන් ඉක්මනටම නපුරු පිටසක් වල ජීවින්ව හොයන්න ඕනේ.
මේ ඔයා යාට තේරුම් කරන්නකෝ.
හැමදාම හවස පහයිතියට නිකන්නේ.
ගන්නවත මට පෙන්නනවා තමුන්ගේ හැඳුනුම්පත.
ඇයි අනේ සෙමි බෝයි කිව්වම හැමෝම දන්නේ.
ඔයා හිතන්නේත් මං හිතපු දේවද?
මොනාද නංගි හිතා ඉන්නේ හැමදාම පහයිතියට සිරස ටීවී බලන්න.
සෙමි බෝයි
සතියේ දිනවල හවස 5:30ට සිරස ටීවී ඔස්සේ.
පුතේ මට බයක් දැනෙනවා. වෙනදා දැනෙච්ච නැති විදිය බය.
මෙච්චර කාලයක් උන්ට ඕන විදියට නටන්න තියලා හිටියා. ඒක වැරදිරේ. උන්ට අතින් පස්සේ මේ මහ පොළොවේ ජීවත් වෙන්න අයිතියක් නැහැ.
එකක් මතක තියාගන්න.
මම රොකීගේ මල්ලි.
ඊපස්සේ අපි බලමු.
Rocky Chapter 2 අද රාත්‍රී 8ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage, and we are discussing national interests and international relations. Now, Dr. Harinda, before the break, you mentioned the non-aligned movement. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you had the non-aligned movement, or NAM as we know it, coming out of, you had the Western Bloc, the US and Western Europe, the UK, France, and so on. And then you had the Soviet bloc, the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, the Warsaw Pact, and its supportive countries around the world. And then you had so many countries who were in between. They did not want to join one or the other. And so NAM came about, but it wasn't purely a security arrangement. There was a lot more to it, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think the non-alignment movement, or non-alignment as an idea and non-alignment movement as the vehicle of that, it came at a particular time and space and a particular context where you had, as you said, the two divisions, and then also you had a series of countries which came out of what we call the decolonization process. So a lot of new countries, new nation states, but in different levels of political maturity. So I mean, one of the things people still can't wrap around is, why are we in this so-called third world, or why are we in this global south? Why are we destined to be like this? One of the biggest challenges is, when the two more mature citizens were there, we came out late and we were mostly colonized, and we had different levels of colonial experiences, and so all these countries, though they had political architectures that looked like the others, they were in different levels of maturity and sophistication, and most of them kind of didn't have particularly a say in the global affairs, right? So non-alignment is a kind of from a political perspective at an international level, it was about trying to, what we call, gather up, to align together to create an amplified voice that may be taken seriously because you have numbers, but it's nuanced. But at the very core of the values of non-alignment, I think this is what we are missing, because we never have we go by the literal meaning of non-alignment. So that is what has happened in Sri Lanka. I hear so many debates about non-alignment. We take the idea literally by the meaning of literal meaning. But non-alignment actually, in a larger sense, was what, as even Nehru pointed out those days, who was a major architect of, was non-alignment was not about being not aligned. It was mostly about another option, what we call the third way. So, for example, if you look at global affairs of the 20th century, it was about whether you create a capitalist system, whether you go with the capitalist bloc, or you go with the communists. So, instead, what if there was a third way, right? So, this idea of the third way, and the fact that the ability for countries to pursue that third way was the larger sense of non-alignment. Of course, countries embraced it in different ways. How and how it became a movement, how it tried to kind of work with the rest of the world. Of course, that is a long story. I don't think that is very relevant in this conversation, but that is non-alignment. So what has happened in the 21st century is the fact that some of the conditions that was in the 20th century for non-alignment has disappeared. But a new set of conditions are there, a new set of, it is based on countries, foreign relations are based on the global environment. First is a regional environment. For example, for Sri Lanka, before we think of the global environment, we have to look at our regional environment. How has things changed? So because the India that we are dealing with today is definitely not the Nehruvian India. The Nehru Gandhi India is gone. This is the India that came up that is being reshaped, redefined. I mean, is emerging under BJP-led, Modi, led in India that came after 2014. Same with China. Same with the United States. If you look at the world, it has changed. So, I think foreign policy decisions where we, pitch our hedge, our bets, cannot be held hostage in the same parameters we kind of adhered in the 20th century. But that doesn't mean we totally need to dish them. There are certain, so this idea of the third way is still very valid. I think if you look at this whole, you refer to the spat between the US and in India. So I think from an Indian perspective, this is a price India is paying, not for being, it's not the term, not being non-aligned, but pursuing the goal of what we call sovereign autonomy. That is a goal countries play or try to achieve when they feel they have the heft and they have the ability to benefit and leverage global contradictions to your own interests without also harming the countries that you deal with. So I think the Americans are not very comfortable with India's pursuit of strategic autonomy. Of course, Americans need India very much in their strategic ambitions, such as containing China, such as being the largest democracy in the Asian region, especially in the Indian Ocean region. So you need, but the same they have this problem. So I think it's articulated in a different way. That is why India is saying, when Trump is saying, you buy Russian oil, Indians are saying, of course, you also trade with Russia. It's different aspects of trade. You trade more with Russia than we do. So why are you telling us to stop trading oil with Russia? Because you also trading. The West is still trading with Russia because Russia has certain things that the West and the Americans need. So why are you having a double standard? That's what India is asking.
Now, let's look a little deeper at this India-US situation. Is there a certain element of a backlash against India for its rapid rise and its emergence as it's a regional power and perhaps a bit more than a regional power? And of course, for decades, India didn't project that. They were very insular for many decades after independence, but now they are going out to the world, and it's not just about India as a country. There are millions of Indians living in countries like the United States who are making a huge difference. So is there a certain backlash here which is happening?
Yeah, I think there is a backlash. The backlash is happening because for the reasons you said, what I said earlier, it's the reiteration of the fact that India, when a country is growing, when a regional power is growing, when it's very clear that some of its capabilities are not just regional, it has a global reach. While it's still in the nascent stage, you can still, there is no comparison between the Indian capability and the US, for example. India is still quite behind, but India is growing. Is same with China. So I think what Indians, but India, as you rightly pointed out, started to kind of showcase that. The confidence in Indian statecraft, the confidence among Indian diplomats, business community, India's large reach to global investments, taking over European giants, automobile industry, mining, space industry, technology. I think that actually is a sign of India pursuing what we call the strategic autonomous goals. But India wanted to grow in their own terms. That is the challenge. India is now facing the backlash. Because India, as sovereign autonomy is that sovereign autonomy, the pursuit of sovereign autonomy is kind of arguing that we will grow in our own terms, and we don't want to be restricted by your framing. So in that context, we are not going to tell and take a position that Russia invaded Ukraine and Russians should be, hence there should be sanctions. No, we don't see it in that framing. You do, but we look at it in a different way. So that I think has not gone well with a Trumpian presidency, because Trump doesn't like nuances. I don't think Trump presidency likes to look at the big. I mean, he doesn't take complex views, because he's kind of very keen. There are things that can run in, deals can be made, deals can be struck. So I mean, if you look at the language, the way he frames things are very simplified cagings. I think that's where the biggest contradiction is.
Now, if you look at the global situation, Dr. Harinda, do you see a certain weakness in global leadership? And I'm referring to if you look back a few decades, when you had very tough, respected statesmen and women, people like Marshal Tito, Nehru, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and at that time even Mrs. Sirima Bandaranaike was well known, although we didn't have much clout, but there was a certain level of respect for such leaders. Do we see less of that now among global leadership?
I think it is also a product of the time. It is not the fact that we lack global leaders. It's a fact that we have all returned to the more regional and domestic interests. So the best people perceive, now for example, take the United States. Up to Obama, they were trying to fix global problems. Look at the COPs, the environmental, the climate funds, and all championing of. But they are systematically being dismantled. If you look at all the American withdrawals from UN institutions and UN agencies, so that people can say that's a decline of global leadership, but it is a reassertion of strong domestic national leaders, which every country feels is a need of the hour. So it is basically a response to a groundswell that believes we have gone far too global and we have forgotten, and there are so many people who have been left behind because these leaders went too global. And many people in our own neighborhoods backyard. Look at for example, take the US. Right? Take the breakdown of the system, breakdown of education, infrastructure. How many people died of COVID, for example? How many people are still without, there's basic access to basic, things. So I think that is the problem. So what has happened now is we see the rise of very charismatic leadership that is very focused, that is visible in the global stage, but their interests are driven not by global ambitions, but their interests are driven by national ambitions to elevate that national ambition to a global level. Look at India. India argues we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be, of course they say we want to be responsible, but everywhere it's America first, India first, China first. I mean, that's for China is trying to say they have a larger global role to play. But I think it's a return of a 21st century, a new kind of articulation of nationalisms, in a way, by the bigger players. Only when the bigger players kind of align, you have a global system. Otherwise, there is no. If the minors align, if we all small states come together and say something, that's not going to go anywhere. The bigger players have to have a common consensus. That leadership is no longer there. I don't see the interest as well.
Interesting indeed. Now, let's look at the rise of commerce, the economic factor in the determining of national interests. And here, once again, we in Sri Lanka, do we know what our economic interests really are? And also our opportunities when it comes to that. I mean, yes, we have our interests, but then do we look at the global opportunities and do we work towards them? Is there something lacking there?
I'm no economic expert, but even the very little understanding I have, I feel very disappointed in the way we try to understand global trade. I think one of the, we are in a time when there is a huge debate around education reforms. I think we all agree that education has to, more than the reforms, education has to be updated and has to be agile, and also some global kind of consciousness has to be inculcated. I think we really need, yes, from school level, the understanding of importance of entrepreneurship, trade, and international trade. I think we really lack the understanding, the imagination of that. Because of that, we have been consistently failing to strategically frame our trade ambitions. How do we do a negotiation? So how do we understand so trade is very strategic. We understand trade for trade, not for a strategic thing, not for our national interest. So it's very easy to say, if we talk about, say, if you use the term connectivity with India, oh, you're talking about selling the country to India. This whole argument. If you talk about a free trade agreement with the US, oh, you're going with that. Can you remember that argument that was made when the Millennium Challenge Corporation was trying to set up the project? There was this argument that we are going to be bifurcated from Trinco to Mana. The Americans are going to create a zone where it will help kind of I mean, that kind of, we are so very behind in the general understanding of trade, economics, commerce, as well as I don't think there is any strategic thinking inculcated in our mindsets. So people are dominated by, even you can be a very famous, popular tuition guru who can convince Sri Lankan public, look, this is what's going to happen. So and it has happened. That conviction happened, and that conviction went up to the parliament. So if I have nothing against this whole idea of a tuition and all this, but if you can change the strategic mindset of a public by giving an interpretation like that, it shows where actual education is. So we really are in a crisis in that way. So that is why we have failed. We have tried FTAs. Idea of FTAs become political. But if you look around countries have thrived on FTAs. Small countries, big countries. Because if you have a coming global system which is chaotic, things that can buffer is certain regional, bilateral, multilateral arrangements that we can do trading, we can do traveling. For example, I think the government did a good thing by opening up more free visa schemes. I think that is necessary. We have to create a sense of connectivity, but that has to translate into businesses, BOI processes, all these things. Because I think if not, we are not going to. I think we will go into serious crisis with this coming chaos if we are not very well integrated into some kind of economic arrangements.
So what you're saying is we need to determine our national interests because of the world being in flux.
Yeah, and we should not try to over-securitize national interests in a way which national interest becomes itself our limitations. That is what has happened to Sri Lanka. We have over-securitized certain things. They themselves are becoming like our self-imposed inhibitors. Moment nobody is allowed to talk about connectivity, so you get thrashed. I think we should have, of course, there has to be a debate when we have a very large, one of the fastest growing economies and a behemoth next to us. We have to have a security understanding, but we should also have understanding that negotiations are essential and that kind of working with these behemoths are important. So we should not use national interest to impinge on our ability to think. National interest strategically moderated can be the best way to guide that. So we need national interests that are strategically articulated and that gives us the space to operate, not the space to cut off.
Now, Dr. Harinda, I referred to the world being in flux right now and in a state of uncertainty. But let me take you back to 2022 when Sri Lanka was in a state of uncertainty. Our economy had collapsed, our government was bankrupt. At that point, it struck me that we again didn't have a set of strong fundamentals to guide us out of this and to show us the way forward. So what actually seemed to happen is we turned to the IMF, which is a lending agency, very important one nevertheless, but it's a bank. So it shouldn't have been the be-all and end-all, and that became a political football because we didn't seem to know what our goals were nationally, our national interests, and how we were going to get out of this situation.
Yeah, I think that's partly because this is one of the consistent political failures we have encountered. That is because we have consistently banked on singular political leadership. So when the leaders fail, there is a systemic crisis. So I don't say we should not. Of course, people always look for a leadership. But parallelly, the leadership's responsibility is building this up into creating, so at least hopefully, let's see if this government does it, to create these fundamentals, to create a larger platform instead of institutional processes that safeguards and is able to, to have certain continuity in certain critical areas. We can't afford to have political failures aligned to state failures. No, Japan had last few years so many political failures, right? Leaders being shot, leaders losing power. Not just Japan, many countries. But you don't see the system for failing, right? So we really need to build that fail-safe. The only way to build Sri Lanka's fail-safe is to have a clearly articulated, agreed upon set of principles that Sri Lanka should actually pursue, at least in the context of security, economy, foreign policy. If we consistently fail to articulate them, again, there is no point even a government coming with a 100% mandate if they fail to do this, because after a few times, it may again go back. So you need to create a system, a robust fail-safe mechanisms, as well as a system that can, that can navigate. And that is where this need for articulation of national interest, strategic reviews, assessment processes, institutional architecture that does it, that can be led politically, but doesn't have to be dismantled or diffused politically, just because the politicians or political leadership is failing.
Right. And my final question, because we are almost out of time, is apart from the political, diplomatic, legal, all those people, we also expect a certain leadership from or involvement of the business community. And do you see that as lacking in Sri Lanka? Our chambers, the many chambers of commerce and industry and exporters and so on, are they getting involved enough in the determination of our national interests?
I think I'm not the best qualified person or the exposed person to give a very articulated answer, but with my minimal engagement with the corporate sector, I finally see the corporate sector is now, I think in a way thanks to Trump, understanding the fact that they also need to understand, engage with these processes, and I also feel that this is government responsibility to at least bring the top business leaders as well as the SMEs, to in a consultation process to talk about their challenges, as well as to educate them about what the government needs to do. So, the business leaders need to know statecraft. They need to know geopolitics. Right? That is why globally, if you look at, there is a concept called geopolitics for C-suites. Business leaders need to know the CEO, CFO, CEOs need to understand the geopolitical environment. If not, they can't guide their businesses. You need to have geopolitical business intelligence even at a middle leadership level. So this is where I think the corporate sector also needs to kind of in a way, design themselves in a way to be open to these concepts. They are doing functionally well. They were doing, but they now need to do more than business. That's why there is the idea that every company also have to have their foreign policy. There is idea like that. So I think we should be. It's a two-way thing. They should come in and they should be brought in.
Excellent. And I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to Dr. Harinda Vidanage, Director of the Center for Strategic Assessment at the Kotalavala Defence University. Thank you very much, Dr. Harinda, for being with us.
Thanks, Nilesh. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.
TV1. TV for life.
Former IGP Deshabandhu Tennakon arrested by the CID over charges linked to the attack on the Aragalaya in Galle. Notice issued to Rajitha, who is evading the bribery commission, to appear in court on the 29th of August. 7-hour statement recorded from former Minister Manusha over alleged illegal acquisition of assets. Daily loss of postal strike exceeds 40 million rupees. Is the strike a conspiracy against the state? Complaint filed with the CID. We cannot contend with the mastermind. A revelation from former President Maithripala. Grand finale of the Sri Lanka Wanitabhimana held in Stein Studios with much grandeur. Anudhi Gunasekara wins the award for Most Popular Woman in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka non-compliant with World Anti-Doping Code. World Anti-Doping Agency warns.
TV1. TV for life.
Compared to last 10 years.
That's not true.
It is.